I'm gonna let them in now.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Learning and Mending Bison and Range. I'm Jen, and I'm going to start you off tonight with our weekly embroidery of the week. This week we have a beautiful underground pattern that came from Trish Mulvey. And as you can see, she used the technique of adding the glitter thread. I don't know if it translates as well, but in person, it's dynamic. It sparkles and has such a great 3D effect to it. So while we wait for everybody to get into their squares, like I said, we'll just do quick introductions and share what we're working on tonight. Again, I'm Jen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm zooming in from Studio City. And tonight I will be continuing my bison pattern that I've been working on for the last couple weeks. And
Wow, that looks amazing.
oh, thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow.
It's been a lot of fun. So I'm going to pass this to Susan.
Hi, thank you for letting me in. I always seem to not have the correct link for some reason. I'm on the back, but I'm here up in the Hollywood Hills, and I am going to continue working on the only embroidery that I have, which I haven't gotten very far, but I have a little done. So I'm going to be continuing that. I think it's an amoeba or something like that. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm sorry I missed a couple of these sessions, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more tonight because it's fascinating. I was just up in San Francisco for the Bioneers Conference, and there was a lot of indigenous programming that was very inspiring. So then this is great that we're doing this too. So thank you.
And I will pass it to Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm calling in from Mar Vista, and tonight I am, I got impatient and I just kind of drew off of one of the pictures that you guys posted, and I'm going to make this into something, and I guess I'll show you later. It's going to take a while, but um, that's what I'll be doing and listening in, of course, and I'm going to pass it on to Anna.
Hey there, sorry I came in late. I assume we're just saying where we are and what we're working on. Is that right? Okay. I am just came into Cleveland, Ohio, the land of the Haudenosaunee peoples, and I did just receive my grandmother's quilting supplies, but she cannot, because she cannot use her hands any longer. But I don't have that set up yet. So today I'm painting this mandala that is indigo dyed newsprint. Then I'm applying some watercolor, but it feels like I'm mending because it's very like netted and circular. And I will pass it on to Olan.
Hi, Anna. It's Olan, and I'm calling in from West Hollywood and using she, her pronouns. And tonight I shall be drawing and listening. And I will pass this along to Dee.
Hi, Derainer, calling in from Baldwin Hills, California. Go by she, her pronoun. And I am still working on my native sunflower pollinators. And I hope to finish it soon because I want to get one of those lovely bison patterns next to start on. And I will pass it on to Mish.
Hello, Michelle. He, they from El Sereno. I'm working or finishing when I started last week. I'm not sure what it is. You know, I don't know. It's some kind of network, and I'm happy to be part of the last session and very sad because I learned a great deal. And I'm going to pass it to Katie. Hi. Katie.
Hi everybody, Callie here, calling from Seattle near the Salish Sea. I love that. I love calling out the Salish Sea. I'm gonna be working tonight, so I got my needle threaded, and I'm going to get into this bison and have a few threads by the final session. I'm gonna be able to share some embroidery with you guys. So I'll be working on that, and she, they, her pronouns, and I will pass it on to Emily.
Thanks, Kelly. Emily here in Echo Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. She, her pronouns. I've got my whoops. Got my bison that I'm working on. Very excited to be with you all. I'll be helping out with the screen share tonight. And let me pass it to my friend Doug.
Thank you, Emily. My name's Douglas Lee, and I'm calling in from the Metabolic Studio in Los Angeles. I use he, him, they pronouns, and tonight I will just be listening. So happy to be here, and I'll pass it on to Lauren.
Hi, everybody. It's Lauren using she, they pronouns, calling from Metabolic Studio. And I am working on one of these incredible bison patterns. And I will pass it on to Rowena.
Hi everyone, I am Rowena calling in from Oakland, California, and I am working on, I think it's a cell. I'm not exactly sure what it is. It's beautiful. And I'm loving the sparkly blue thread. Happy to have made it in. Thank you to whoever sent me the corrected link. I will pass it to, I don't know who hasn't gone. Susan?
But no, Susan
Oh.
went. I will take it over at this point. For those of you that have not had an opportunity to introduce yourself, there'll be time later during the discussion to introduce and share what you're working on. Again, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Learning and Mending. Since the pandemic began, Metabolic Studio has moved our weekly open studio practice to Zoom. In this 8th series of Learning and Mending, Bison and Range, we will look at the grassland ecozone that spans more than 180 million acres, stretching across the center of the Northern American continent, from the northern tip to the wetlands that flow into the oceans, and how this vast network of biologically diverse landscapes has been radically re-terraformed by the ideologies of manifest destiny, extractivism, capitalism, monocultural farming, and the colonialization of the commons of soil, water, and seeds. To honor the bison, we have a new embroidery designed by Michelle Briard. We are happy to add to our collection. If you would like one of these or another one of the patterns we have to offer, please send an email with your mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org. In this series, we explore the story of this landscape, commonly referred to as the Great Plains, and the symbiotic relationship the bison herds shared with our ecosystem over millennia, before nearly exterminated by European settlers. The First Nations of this continent are still deeply connected with the epistemological independent web of life in this series. We will learn about the contemporary movement led by indigenous people and their allies to bring the bison back to the range while confronting systematic colonialism in its past and present forms. In this time of spring renewal, we come together to celebrate the deep knowledge of the herd, the biodiverse prairies of our continent, indigenous wisdom and people, and continue to explore the systematic changes that are urgently needed for a more just and ecologically sane future. Olan Jones, director of Overtone Industries, will conduct our participatory Zoom choir with sound artist Douglas Lee. They will direct us in a virtual choir through the silo we work with on the western boundary of the Great Basin each week during this series. This 6-week series is curated and led by Kelly Skye, an ecologist, artist, and PhD candidate at UC Santa Cruz. Tonight, we will share our screen displaying the week's reading. Feel free to jump in and read aloud from the text as you feel inspired, as we welcome one and all to both listen and giving voice to the unique texts we share each week. And now I'd like to pass it over to Kelly, and she will give us a summary of tonight.
Thank you, Miss Jen. Hi, everybody. So I'm really excited. Tonight is really cool because we're gonna do deep time. We're gonna actually look back in time together and think about how the prairies started, literally as an ancient seabed, and they were shaped by these massive glaciers. And it's really exciting to, I don't know, it really touched me to really think back to these times and think across time and space. So I think tonight it'll be fun and interesting. For me, it sure was going through these readings. We're definitely going to encounter this incredible group of these gigantic wild animals that roam the plains in numbers that is like hard for us to imagine today. And this includes this humongous bison species that came over the Bering Strait that was 50% bigger than the bison of today and had these big old horns. So we get to connect with the origins of the bison and look back. And I'm hoping to, next week we are going to slowly start to wrap up the series, and I'm hoping to connect this deep past with the future and what we might learn from this, looking back across time. And seeing these major climate shifts and changes on the landscape. And for me, it was interesting. It was almost like I could close my eyes and I felt like I was in this time lapse video when I was reading through these, where it was like I could see the shape shifting landscapes and these different beings coming and going. And it just gives you a really interesting perspective that you don't commonly have. So it was a great experience. And the first reading will be from the Prairie and Natural History book, which we've read from before. But the second one is coming from a book called Buffalo Nation, History and Legend of the North American Bison by Valerius Geist. Valerius is a Canadian biologist and a specialist in North American large mammals. So you will hear kind of a more scientific tone in his writing as compared to like Winona LaDuke that we've been reading and others, but it's just really fascinating to look back through that lens of time. So I think you'll enjoy it. And I would, just wanted to also just say, like, connecting ideas of the past with the future. I would love to be kind of collectively aware of what we can learn from the deep past, as we face a future with, lots of changes in climate and things ahead. So I think it's still very relevant to our moment in time. And then lastly, I just wanted to also mention there's a couple parts that have kind of bad resolution tonight. I had to dig up the book Buffalo Nation from an archive and try to get it digitized, but it's worth it, and it's not too bad. But I apologize for the resolution in moments. And I think that was my little intro. So from here we can start reading.
Native American, Native North American legends, the wellspring of buffalo. Many Native North Americans came to rely on the buffalo for food as well as clothing, shelter, and as a source of myriad daily utensils, toys, and more. As Oglala Sioux Chief Red Cloud told a white man in tallying the 22 uses of Native North Americans had for bison, his meat sustained life. It was little wonder that the buffalo also became a focus for the spiritual life of many Native North Americans. And the stories of the creation of buffalo were important legends, often helping explain the origin of human beings as well. A recurring theme in buffalo creation stories of the Plains Indians centers on a cave or hole in the earth from which the bison came forth like a spring of water. Crow Chief Plentycoop told his biographer Frank Bird Linderman of his vision of this source of the buffalo in the crazy mountains of Montana, recounted in American, the life story of a great Indian, Plentycoop, chief of the Crows, the John Day Companion, 1930. From the peak in the crazy mountains, I saw a buffalo bull. I got up and started to go to the bull because I knew he was the person who wanted me. Then he shook his red rattle and sang a queer song 4 times. Look, he pointed. Out of the hole in the ground came the buffalo, bulls and cows and calves without number. They spread wide and blackened the plains. Everywhere I looked, great herds of buffalo were going in every direction, and still others without number were pouring out of the hole in the ground to travel on the wide plains.
Folklorist Catherine Judson also, I should have brought my glasses, recorded the Teton Sioux story in Myths and Legends of the Great Plains, A.C. McClung and Company, 1913. In the days of the grandfathers, buffaloes lived under the earth. In the olden times, they say a man who was journeying came to a hill where there were many holes in the ground. He entered one of them. When he had gone inside, he found buffalo chips and buffalo tracks on all sides. He found also buffalo hairs where the buffaloes had rubbed against the walls. These were the real buffaloes, and they lived under the ground. Afterwards, some of them came to the surface of the earth and lived there. Then the herds on the earth increased. Explorer Colonel Richard Irving Dodge met other Plains Indians who said they knew of underground wellspring of bison. Some of the some oh sorry oh there we go some stating that the source was a huge cave in northwest Texas. A Dodge recounted in his 1883 book Our Wild Indians. One Indian had gravely and solemnly assured me that he had been at the caverns, and with his own eyes saw the buffalo coming out in countless throngs. Others have told me that their fathers or uncles or some other of the old men have been there. In 1879, Stonecalf assured me that he knew exactly where the caves were, though he had never seen them, that the great God had provided this means for the constant supply of food for the Indian. And however recklessly the white men might slaughter, they could never exterminate them. When I last saw him, the old man was beginning to waver in his belief and feared that the bad god had shut up the openings and that his people might starve. Permanent winter. Nobody knows for sure why the cold settled in as it did. Whatever the cause, by between about 3 million and 2 million years ago, the Earth had cooled so much that permanent winter had settled over the northern reaches of the continent. The tepid summers no longer melted away the preceding winter's snows. Beginning at high latitudes and progressing southward, drifts massed into mounds and mounds into mountains until the snow compacted into ice under its own tremendous weight. Eventually, after several thousand years, these glaciers began to advance, flowing almost imperceptibly but relentlessly south over the central lowlands. In time, the northern third of North America was buried under some 2 miles, 3 kilometers of ice. That's about the height from base to peak of Mount Everest. In its heartland of the Precambrian Shield, the ice reached a maximum depth of about 16,000 feet or 5,000 meters. Geologists used to believe that the glaciers advanced and retreated 4 times over the span of about 2 million years. These successive incursions were known in North America as the Nebraskan, Kansan, Illinoisan, and Wisconsin glaciations in honor of their southernmost extent. But more recent research suggests that the glaciers probably made many more than 4 sweeps down the continent, each time grinding away the traces left by previous glaciations.
Since much of the record has been wiped clear, a detailed chronology of the Ice Age on the prairies cannot be reconstructed. But we do know that by about 1.2 million years ago, a vast slab of ice had bulldozed its way almost to the present-day confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. At its maximum, the ice sheet probably extended over the Canadian prairie provinces and south through the northeastern Montana, the Dakotas, northeastern Kansas. From there, it cut across the plains of northern Missouri and then eastward across the continent to the ice-stricken valley of the St. Lawrence. After that ice sheet retreated, the glaciers never again penetrated quite so deeply into the plains. The final glaciation, for example, which began some 100 to 75,000 years ago, 100,000 to 75,000 years ago, didn't progress much farther south than central Iowa. But the devastation that the glaciers inflicted was not limited to their actual footprint. Whenever the glaciers melted back, they left behind outwashed plains of sand and silt. Ferocious winds that developed over the ice fields picked up this grit and hurled it around the interior of the continent. In a number of places, notably the Great Sandhills of Saskatchewan, and the Sandhills of western Nebraska, the wind laid down its burden in vast fields of dunes. Elsewhere, the storms whipped up clouds of dust, rock that had been ground into flour by the glaciers, and broadcast it over the land. Today, these silt louse deposits, often several yards thick, form the bluffs along the Iowa side of the Missouri River and provide the matrix for rich rolling farmlands in Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, and elsewhere. The ice began its final halting retreat about 18,000 years ago. Over the succeeding millennia, a block of ice larger than present-day Antarctica gradually melted away, and it didn't go quietly. Torrents gushed from the eroding ice sheets, gouging out meandering coulees, and wide, flat-bottomed river valleys as they coursed eastward over the plains. Today, dry coulees writhe incongruously across the northern prairies from nowhere to nowhere, and glacial spillways seem ludicrously oversized for the quiet streams like the Milk River that now occupy their broad channels. And it wasn't only moving water that left its mark on the land. In many places, meltwater was prevented from flowing away by ice dams, and the silt-laden water pooled to form shallow, milky lakes, such as Glacial Lake Regina in south-central Saskatchewan and Lake Dakota in east-central Dakota. The largest of these pro-glacier lakes, Glacial Lake Agassiz, flooded some 135,000 square miles, or 350,000 square kilometers at its maximum extent, 3 times the size of Lake Superior, and largest modern freshwater lake, including extensive tracts in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and the Red River lowlands in eastern North Dakota and northern Minnesota. When the ice and then the water finally retreated from the land, these lake bottoms stood exposed as broad plains bounded by terraced beaches, all covered with a dressing of mineral-rich silt.
The land that emerged directly from under the ice sheets, by contrast, was a rough and tumble mess strewn with the rubble that glaciers had dropped as they retreated. Sinuous ridge of gravel and silt called eskers marked the courses of stream that had once flowed under or through the ice. Strange colonial hills called cames stood where streams pouring out of the glaciers had deposited gravel and sand. One of the most prominent glacial features on the northern plains was a long, broken ridge of hill country called the Missouri Coteau that meandered and still meanders across central Saskatchewan and south through the Dakotas. Geologists refer to the Coteau as dead ice moraine because it formed when the hunks of ice became buried in gravel and lay there for centuries, ever so gradually rotting away. As each block of ice melted, the gravel that had been lying on top of it sagged to form a depression or prairie pothole. Meanwhile, south of the reach of the glaciers on the foreshore of the Rockies, the landscape had also been undergoing renovations. Sometime before the ice age set in, the entire western prairies had inexplicably begun to rise. As a result, the rivers, which previously had been building up the plains with the loads of gravel and silt, now began to cut through the very layers they had previously deposited. The erosion was most dramatic along the slopes of the Rockies, where the rivers were powerful enough to wear through 70 million years of sediments. Along the Front Range of the mountains in Colorado, for example, the South Platte and the Arkansas rivers have dug 1,600 to 2,000 feet, 500 to 600 meters below the level of high plains, only where erosion's resistant layers of rock have stood against this assault can the remnants of the older landscape be seen. The tops of the buttes and the mesas that the tower over the eroded landscape were once a part of the continuous high plain. By the end of the Galatian, the Great Plains of North America had been transformed from the seabed of ancient times in the mosaic of the distinctive landforms. To the north extended the rumpled terrain of glacial debris. Beyond the limit of the glaciers, to the south and the east, lay softer landscape of ancient ocean floors, much of it now blanketed in the wind-shaped drifts of glacial sand and silt. To the west, the flatlands of the high plains stepped up steadily toward the front ranks of the Rockies. And anywhere, the rivers were cutting down into the land, etching deep valleys, canyons, and where the land was suitably dry and bare, badlands. But if the very landforms of the plains were beginning to look more like those of the present, many of the life forms still did not. Disadvantaged by the cool, wet weather of the Ice Age, the grasses had the previously dominated the plains had lost ground to other plants. Now a band of tundra skirted the retreating ice, while the south dark coniferous forests spanned much of the continent. Pure grasslands were restricted to scattered meadows and perhaps to the relic prairie crammed into the southernmost plains. Together, these diverse habitats were occupied by stunning array of life, including white-tailed and mule deer, caribou, several species of pronghorns, black bears, cougars, bobcats, lions, cheetahs, saber-toothed cats, horses, llamas, one-humped camels, even Ice Age elephants, woolly mammoths, shaggy breasts that stood almost 10 feet or 3 meters tall, browsed on the tundra, while Colombian mammoths, just as unkept as much larger, appear to have favored the remnant patches of the grassland. Meanwhile, in the forest, their somewhat daintier relatives, the mastodons, the size of Indian elephants, fed on the diet of black spruce boughs and other woody tidbits.
Look at that Colombian mammoth. The mammoths and mastodons were relatively recent arrivals on the plains. Ice Age immigrants that migrated across the Bering Land Bridge from Eurasia during intermittent cold spells. Whenever the climate worsened and the glaciers advanced, water became locked up in the ice and sea levels dropped, exposing a bridge of land across the Bering Strait between Siberia and Alaska. When the glaciers receded again, the land bridge was drowned, but a passageway simultaneously opened to the south through the Canadian plains, which allowed the newcomers to wander into the heart of the continent. Some mammals, including an ancestral camels and horses, made this journey in reverse, moving north when the plains corridor was open and then migrating across to Asia when the land bridge appeared. Of all the species that arrived on the North American plains during the Ice Age, a menagerie that included not only elephants but also grizzlies, elk, and moose, two demand special notice. The steppe bison, Bison prisus, was a magnificent thick-maned animal with flamboyant, curving horns, attributes that are dramatically depicted in the cave art in Lascaux, France. The first bison herds likely poured across the Bering Land Bridge a few hundred thousand years ago, and eventually made their way south to the Great Plains. Over the millennia that followed, successive waves of steppe bison made the same long trek, eventually meeting and mingling with the descendants of pioneer herds. Meanwhile, the pioneer stock had been changing, shaped by life on the steppe and the forests of this new continent. The result of this complex process of immigration, adaptation, and interbreeding was the emergence of several distinctively North American types: notably the giant long-horned bison latifrons and the somewhat smaller bison antiguus. In time, these species were displaced by an even more compact version, bison bison, the shaggy beast that in historic times provided food and shelter to the first people of the plains. Exactly when those first hunting people arrived on the scene is a mystery. Until quite recently, most archaeologists insisted that humans, members of the genus that was born in East Africa some 2 million years ago, entered North America from Asia by crossing the Bering Land Bridge and traveling down an ice bridge. Traveling down an ice-free corridor into the plains. This migration was said to have happened about 13,000 years ago. Then, in the 1970s, researchers working in Chile uncovered evidence that the people had been living there for 2,000 years before this supposed first arrival date. Subsequent discoveries in Bell County, Texas, and elsewhere have pushed the timelines back even further to at least 15,500 years before present. This accords with the spirit of indigenous memory, which affirms that their forebears were here at the beginning. Equipped with elegantly chipped fragments of stone and bone, these ancestral hunting people killed and butchered not only bison, but also camels, horses, mastodons, and their specialty mammoths. At sites from Alberta to Texas, the proof of their presence, blackened hearths, discarded tools, and cracked marrow bones, lies buried where they left it so long ago. In some places, the skeletons of several large mammals lie strewn about the camps, testimony to the prowess of these big game hunters.
But inevitably, on a planet where change is the only constant, this regime was fleeting. By 13,000 years ago, the fabulous array of large mammals on the plains was already disappearing. As many as 50 species, including giant beavers, ground sloths, lions, cheetahs, direwolves, saber-toothed cats, horses, camels, mammoths, and mastodons, all became extinct within a few thousand years. Did an exploding population of well-fed humans hunt the animals into oblivion, as some archaeologists believe, or was climate change the culprit? The evidence suggests that between about 13,000 and 10,000 years ago, average global temperatures first dropped abruptly and then rebounded. On the North American plains, these climate changes ultimately translated into a dramatic shift in vegetation patterns. Pushed by warmer, drier conditions, the spruce forest gave way to pines, then in places to open, mixed woodlands, and ultimately to grass. In the blink of an eye, geologically speaking, a carpet of grasses spread out across the plains, blued by sage and beard tongue, and enlivened by patches of golden beans, blazing stars, and prairie smoke, or three-flowered avens. The prairies of historic times had finally been created. This new grassland was big and bold, but it was also much less varied than the mixed landscape of tundra, grass, and forest that it had displaced. And perhaps this in itself is enough to explain the disappearance of the Ice Age mega mammals, which required a rich and varied supply of foods that grasslands alone could not provide. Yet if the new habitats were insufficient to sustain mammoths, they appeared perfectly suited to the bison, which soon emerged as the dominant grazing animal on the open range.
As the great herds drummed across the prairie, they of course had no conception of how their homeland had been shaped. The evidence of that drama lay unnoticed beneath their hooves. Long buried evidence of onrushing seas, rising mountains, silt-burdened rivers, and towering cliffs of ice. But the bison were untroubled by the traumas of the past as they flowed across the horizon toward the present.
Buffalo breath.
Chapter 1, Origins of the Buffalo. The buffalo represents the people and the universe and should always be treated with respect. For was he not here before the two-legged peoples? And is he not generous in that he gives us our homes and our food? The buffalo is wise in many things, and thus we should learn from him and should always be as a relative with him. Obala, Shu, Holy Man, Black Elk, describing the Sundance, the Sacred Pipe, 1953. I know a hill in the prairie, a hill full of life. I roamed over it many times as a high school student, scouting for treasures. Low aspen bluffs flanked its western slope, and choke cherries and Saskatoon berries grew on top. Late spring and summer brought a profusion of wildflowers to its slopes. Below were small meadows with native prairie, knee-high thickets of prickly prairie rose, and a dense snowberry bushes. Wolf willow greeted summer with an overpowering scent. Crows and magpies nested here. Meadowlarks sang from fence posts. Savannah sparrows chirped from tangles of wheatgrass. Northern shrike balanced a barbed wire fences, and red-tailed hawks soared overhead. Once in early winter, I stood in awe as a huge flock of sharp-tailed grouse flew overhead, the largest flock I had ever seen. Here I heard the plaintive cry of newborn porcupine and an evening with howling coyotes. Here I shot my first snowshoe hare, and not far away, my first white-tailed buck, a fine 5-pointer. I grew up thinking of the prairie as a landscape rich in life, but I had been deceived. I accepted the prairie as I found it, happy for every square foot not plowed under the overgrazed livestock. I had not seen the prairie during its modern heyday. George Clinton's letters and notes on the North American Indians of 1841, Francis Parkman's accounts of his 1845 travels in the Oregon Trail, or Major William Francis Butler's narrative of his travels across the Canadian plains in mid-1800s, all hint at what it must have been like. Herds of mustangs, pronghorns, and elk, clouds of waterfowl, and huge buffalo herds, followed by the large pack of white wolves that looked as though they were flocks of sheep. Wolf packs of 70 plus and beyond our imagination. Wolf poisoners occasionally killed that many at a single poison carcass. It is hard to imagine meeting hundreds of grizzly bears, yet that is what explorer O.G. Patty saw in 1831 along the Arkansas River. He counted 220 in one day, 8 of which were killed by his party when the bears attacked. I believe the prairie of a century or two ago was rich in species. That too was an error, for the prairie was low in species even when Christopher Columbus arrived in the New World in 1492. The species rich of fauna that evolved on this continent for millions of years and over successive cycles of continental glaciations went largely extinct at the end of the Ice Age, some 10,000 years ago. That was North America's natural fauna, and it is no more. It is today known as Rancho La Brea fauna, after the bone deposits found in the tar pits of Rancho La Brea in Los Angeles.
Life in the Ice Age. In Ice Age North America, the plains teemed with horses and camels, huge Columbian mammoths with long, curving tusks, and peccaries nearly as large as the wild boar. Mastodons, as tall as Indian elephants but bulkier, lived in the coniferous forests. Ground sloths, the same as large as an elephant, the smallest the size of a grizzly, and all well armed and armored against predator attacks, striped trees of bark and branches for their food. Stripped. Tiny pronghorns lived in prairie shrubs, and a large four-horned version roamed the Rocky Mountain foothills. There were thanks. Deer the size and shape of mountain goats, and big, long-legged, large-hoofed moose with huge ornate antlers. White deer were rare but wide-ranging, as were black-tailed deer along the Pacific coast. Mountain goats extended in range to central Mexico. Bighorn sheep were rare, but spread and become numerous late in the glaciation. There were Eucerathares, larger, bighorn relatives of the musk ox in the Rockies. Herbivores in the north included caribou, Dall sheep, Przewalski's horses, saiga, antelope, yak, elk, woolly mammoths, and long-legged forest musk ox. Longhorn North American bison, veritable giants, were found in the Pacific coast as well as in the continent's interior. And there were predators, and what predators! There were true lions on the plains like those in Africa, only larger. There were cheetah-like running cats closely related to but larger than puma. There were lion-sized saber-toothed cats with powerful, well-muscled forelimbs, which probably hunted in large packs. There were elegant scimitar cats, about as large as saber-toothed cats but with longer legs and built lightly for running. There were large jaguars and big packs of hyena-like dire wolves, about as tall as gray wolves, but more massively built. Wow, there were wolf-sized coyotes. Overhead circled huge condor-like vultures, as well as hawks that are no longer with us. Black bears were present but were secretive and scarce. Gray wolves roamed Alaska and Yukon, and many have found the glacial fronts to the south of the continent. However, their remains are scarce. The largest predator was the huge carnivorous short-faced bear, or bulldog bear, Arctodus simus, which exceeded all living bears in size. The tooth of Ranklebrian predators were badly worn compared to those of modern predators, suggesting a tough life for predators in the Pleistocene North America. Tooth fractures in dire wolves, coyotes, saber-toothed cats, and lions recovered from the Rancho del Brie tar pits are 3 times larger than those of modern carnivores. It seems these ancient predators hunted prey that worked hard to escape. The unusual animals that lived in North America also had a marked influence on the vegetation and landscape. Columbian mammoth, mastodons, and ground sloths trampled trees as they stripped the leaves and bark for food, creating a rich underbrush interspersed with the occasional massive old-growth tree that escaped the browsing. Grazing by mammoth, bison, and horses removed mature grass in fertile areas. Reduced grass cover and discontinuous forest canopies meant that forest and prairie fires were rare and relatively small. Ancestors of the bison. Like all cattle, the bison's earliest ancestors were tropical and subtropical species in the extreme south of Asia millions of years before the Ice Age. Unlike other cattle, bison colonized open grasslands early in their history, first in temperate and then in cold temperatures. We know little of this history, which began 4 million years ago and terminated with the beginning of the major glaciations about 1.7 million years ago. These early bisons were relatively small, short-horned, and fleet of foot. With the onset of Ice Age, a northern bison, the steppe bison, evolved in Eurasia and colonized the nutrient-rich. Sorry, could you go up for just a minute? I just want to see how old that effigy sketch there is, if it says up on the right. Buffalo boulder effigy, a rendering of a large effigy of a buffalo seen from the air. The sculpture is of Unger origin and is believed to date to the pre-contact era. It is made of glacial boulders arranged on the prairie near Big Beaver, Saskatchewan. Wow, I wonder how big it is. Yeah, you can scroll down. I think I was around. These early bison were relatively small. The onset of the Ice Age, a northern plains bison, the steppe bison, evolved in Eurasia and colonized the nutrient-rich, fertile ecosystems that formed under the influence of continental and alpine glaciers. During glacial ages, low steppe glaciers, glacial moraines, and huge glacial lakes dominated the landscape. Collectively, these features are known as the Mammoth Steppe or Steep Steppe. In the Ice Age, the Mammoth Steppe extended from eastern Siberia to Alaska and Yukon, allowing animals to roam between North America and Siberia. One species that entered southern North America about 300,000 years ago and survived to become a characteristic species of its fauna was the Eurasian steppe bison, Bison priscus. The precise external appearance of early Bison priscus is not known, but those recorded in cave paintings. So it is known, just a different way of knowing. Of the Upper Paleolithic era, cave paintings from the Upper Paleolithic era that had long, graceful horns and an ornate hair coat different from the modern bison. 3 vital security adaptations shaped Bison priscus before it arrived in North America. Life in the herd, outrunning predators, and, where feasible, confronting and deterring predators. Bison, like many large ungulates living on open plains, opted for life in the selfish herd. Quote, security is the top priority for living beings, all else is secondary, so joining into groups has advantages. Some people believe that the advantage of herds is that they provide more pairs of eyes to spot predators earlier than one pair. But this is not the sole reason, as herds still form at night when unseen predators are most active. Moreover, the herd produces a lot of noise and scent, making it difficult to detect predators. The most important advantage of a herd is safety in numbers, also known as the dilution effect. In a herd, the attention of predators is not focused on anyone in any one individual, but is diluted among the many. Hence, the larger the herd, the better. The most important requirement for life in the herd is getting along with the others of one's own kind so as to neither injure nor alienate them. Aggressive individuals who injure others place themselves in jeopardy as the injured attract predators. Consequently, the herd species evolve without weapons of combat that maximize surface damage in combatants and that are typical of territorial species. Instead, individuals develop large complex horns, antlers, and tusks to catch opponents' charge and to lock heads during full strength engagements. Now sporting type wrestling becomes feasible and sparring is practiced by young and old males outside the mating season. Despite the security afforded. Oh, is my audio coming through okay? Okay. Sorry, Ansu, it might just be yours. Now sporting type wrestling becomes feasible and sparring is practiced by young and old males outside the mating season. Despite the security afforded by the herd, life on the open plains required evading fleet-footed predators, and there's little or no opportunity to hide. The only option is rapid, sustained flight so that the prey may leave the predator behind and lose itself in the vastness of space. Speedy, long-distance running requires large organs for blood circulation and gas exchange. Thus, Eurasian northern plains bison, exposed to wolves and running cats, evolved into large-bodied runners. Bison also developed a style of running. For sustained flight from predators, runners or cursors keep their body level and lift their legs as little as possible to save energy for endurance. In contrast, solitaires such as deer lift their body high during each jump and soon tire. Solitaires run so as to hide quickly in cover, so they need not run far. This option is not available in the open plains. Solitaires have large muscular hindquarters and small front quarters, and their hind legs are longer than the front legs. Cursors have well-developed muscular front quarters and small hindquarters. Their legs are fairly light boned, so they cost little to lift, and their hind and front legs are of similar length. A bison's hump allows it to extend its stride with its front legs, and the longer with the stride, the faster the bison. When it runs, the bison shifts much of the power from the hind legs to the front legs, and the hind legs deliver just enough power to maintain propulsion. The fast-moving plains bison were later hunted by the native peoples, were a challenge to any horse. The fast-moving plains bison that were later hunted by the native peoples were a challenge to any horse. Few horses could run down more than one buffalo in a hunt. A 3-buffalo horse was a treasure to the native North American hunter. Bison priscus not only ran away from predators, but also, when it was advantageous, turned on bears and cats, attacking singly or in small groups. It used social defense formations in which members of the same herd assisted one another when confronting predators, as shown by archaeological excavations of human kill sites, suggesting that the bison were making musk ox-like stands. The long horns of the Eurasian steppe bison had out-pointing tips similar to those horn tips of Cape buffalo and musk ox, two species that regularly take on predators.
The advent of a giant bison. Bison priscus was not small when it crossed from Siberia, but under severe predation pressure in North America, it grew relatively quickly into the gigantic bison latifrons with even larger horns and a higher hump. Compared to its smaller descendant, bison, it also developed legs that favored speed over power. Large body size is not only an aid in sustained running, but it is also an asset when confronting large predators. But why larger, even gigantic horns in response to predation? To better defend oneself against attacking predators? Not at all. The logic of larger horns in response to severe predation runs differently. To a plains, no, to a plains, there we go. Oh, did you want me to read those descriptions? Okay, I can, maybe.
You,
Sorry.
no, you don't have to. I feel like it's a little bit long, the reading tonight, so
Okay,
that
okay,
people
we'll
can get
continue.
the picture. I'm glad you pointed them out because it gives you a visual of some of the change over time.
Beautiful. And I totally lost where we were. Somewhere in here. Not at all. The logic of larger horns in response to severe predation runs differently. To a plains dwelling ungulate, high speed and endurance are essential to escape from predators. Thus, the newborn calf is in a perilous condition, and ideally, it would be as fast and enduring as its mother. Consequently, the more highly developed the young must be at birth. Therefore, the birth weight must go up, and the fat, protein, and sugar content of the mother's milk should also increase. In order to produce large developed young and rich milk, the female must have superior capacities to spare resources for reproduction from her own living requirements. The female should be searching for a mate that is at least her equal, but preferably her superior in resources.
The female should be searching for a mate that is at least her equal, but preferably her superior in resources. The male can signal its superiority by growing luxury organs that are costly in material resources such as horns and antlers and nuptial hair coats. These organs must be sensitive to environmental quality, enlarging when conditions are good and shrinking when they are not. Bison males with large horns signal that they are so good at procuring and processing forage that they have plenty of nutrients and energy to spare. Consequently, the most attractive bull is one with the largest horns and the most ornate body. Thus, the dynamic increase in bison's horn size after their mid-Pleistocene entry into North America is to be expected. Bison latifrons, the giant bison with its immense sweep of horns, characterized North America's Rancho-La-Brean fauna for nearly 300,000 years. After its sudden appearance, oh, that's right. Okay, we're going to stop there because I felt like it was going on and we needed to stop. But then we have this last Native North American legend to read to kind of transition out. And I felt like some of these legends in relation to the deep time perspective were really powerful for me to read. So I wanted to include them as well. So I'll start this off. Buffalo woman leads the buffalo out of the earth. Western historian Mari Sandoz recounted a Pawnee telling the story of the beginning of the world in her book, The Buffalo Hunters, 1954. This legend has as its central characters both a buffalo and a mother figure, the buffalo woman. Sandoz recounts that many Plains Indian stories describe a mother figure with the wisdom of the buffalo. Once, long ago, all things were waiting in a deep place far underground. There were the great herds of the buffaloes and all the people, and the antelope too, and wolves, deer, and rabbits, everything, even the little bird that sings the tear song. Everything waited, as in sleep. Then the one called Buffalo Woman awoke, stretched her arms, rose, and began to walk. She walked among all the creatures, past the little tear bird, the rabbits, and all the rest, as though the people too, and the buffaloes. Everywhere she passed, there was an awakening and a slow moving, as when the eyes, as when the, as when the eyes were making ready for some fine new thing to be seen. Buffalo Woman walked on the ground in a good way, past even the farthest buffaloes, the young cows with their sleeping yellow calves. She went on to a dark round place that seemed like a hole, and she stood there a while looking. Then she bowed her head a little, as one does to pass under the lodge flap, and stepped out. Suddenly the people could see that there was a great shining light all about her, a shining and brightness that seemed blinding as she was gone.
And now a young cow arose and followed the woman, and then another buffalo and another, until a great string of them was following, each one for a moment in the shining light of the hole before he was gone. And the light fell upon the one behind. When the last of the buffaloes was up and moving, the people began to rise, one after another, and fell into a row too, each one close upon the heels of the moccasins ahead. And people, young and old, and weak and strong, went so, out through the hole that was on Poohoo, out upon the shining, warm and grassy place that was the earth, with a wide river plate following below and over everything. Apologies, I lost my place. Thank you. And over everything, a blueness with the tear bird flying toward the sun, the warming sun. The buffaloes were already scattering over the prairie, feeding, spreading in every direction toward the circle that is the horizon. The people looked all around and knew this was their place, the place upon which they would live forever, they and the buffalo together.
And that's it for tonight. I felt like that story was just the right way to end this incredible journey through time and all the different species and beings that were named. I felt it's very powerful in that way. And I do have some guiding questions just to get us started. I'd love to hear your guys'. Yeah, good job, Emily, putting that image, the buffalo breath. It's like keeps coming up over and over. And when I saw that, it was like, so some of my guiding questions tonight, and I'm open, of course, any responses you have to those readings. But one thing I was thinking about is when I look around at the landscape, sometimes I don't often think about how I'm actually could see into geologic time, into deep time when I'm looking at the landscape around me, if I take on that perspective. And so I'm just wondering if any of you, when you look at the landscape, can you see deep time, and what forms does it appear in for you? And then, like I said in the beginning, I'm kind of really fascinated by this idea of how looking into the past, the far past might be able to help us think into the future, because it's kind of condensing time and allowing us to see change from a different perspective than our normal human lens. So I was just curious if how you guys might feel into the idea that looking into the past can help us think about the future. And then the third question is a little bit about the herd wisdom. I love the idea of the wisdom of the herd, and there was a part of these readings where they talked about the herd and all the things that kind of provides or is part of for the bison and has been for millennia. And they also have one of the things that stood out for me with these readings is the bison were able to withstand these huge climactic shifts from forest dominating the plains to the grasslands, and then becoming kind of the species that was able to maintain or work with that ecosystem. And so it's just interesting to me to think about how the bison have been so resilient to these massive shifts throughout time, and how they might be our allies in the future, I guess. And there's this quote from Winona LaDuke. I had to bring her back in here since we didn't get much of her tonight. And she says, "In the minds and hearts of the buffalo peoples, the prairies are where the buffalo are meant to be, the place where the wind calls their names. Buffalo are the animals of the past, yes, but there are also animals of the future." And so I think her quote kind of it brought up that question for me about them being both of the past and future. So I'll put that in the chat, and I'd love to hear any reflections anybody has.
I don't know. I always think about how the land. My dad used to take us to the beach and point at the rocks, and he was a frustrated geologist, so he would like say, oh, that's half of it was just made up. I think he just made stuff up, but it made you like go into like this deep time, like you call it. Even if you kind of knew he didn't really know what he's talking about, he was like so into it. And I think some landscapes are much easier to see. Obviously, like desert is quite easy, much easier to see. And yeah, I guess what I'm thinking is it's good to engage kids in that way, because then they'll always remember it. Like even like on a road trip, that say if you say those things to kids, they'll always sort of be like, yeah, it used to be different. I think.
I mean, one thing I was thinking is it's also interesting how I think about the work that Metabolic Studio is doing and how infrastructure has kind of paved over time, or the ability to see into time. And yeah, like, removing parts of the concrete jacket of the LA River, and all of a sudden this like portal into the past is opened up that is just right below the concrete that kind of holds us in these boxes or in these planes of understanding. But yeah, I just love these readings because they really, all of a sudden the whole continent was like shape shifting for me, and I could see these tremendous forces at play, in my mind's eye, at least. So it was really interesting.
Was it a while back, a few years ago, I did work with some people about the river, like anyway, but about in LA, and all the like the heart of LA, like where Lincoln Heights is, and the confluences of the freeways and the trains and the river. And I think that the land does retain all of those ancient paths of the river, the like bigger rivers, and all those things get built onto those things. So they're already, although it seems like you can't see them, you can. It's often that the road is in the same place as where a stream was, I guess.
Yeah, but to also to work with Lauren and have her envision what the past was along the river is magnificent, you guys. If you guys ever get a chance to see the floodplain and see what is actually germinating and how she has that ability to set back time, when you sit at the moon, certain spaces, you get a glimpse of the past. Quite frankly, it's just one of those things where it blows your mind, and that she has that forethought to do that. Not so much for us as humans, but really to think about habitat and pollinate, everything that has to do with habitat. Not even, and also for her to think about the invisible gardens, the invisible microorganisms, the mycelium, the networks, the trees, the plants, and how they function below ground as they do above ground. Boy, it's pretty amazing. If you guys look at my, I don't know what you call it, my screen, that's kind of like the glimpse that I'm trying to show the world, right? That those of us that have this vision to convert a tow yard into something that sustains life, that's the little glimpse that I get to see on a daily basis. So it's possible.
I had a thought today as I was walking to my car and just about to drive over to Metabolic Studio. I shared it with Diego and James, but here's maybe a moment to share it with the broader group. I live in Echo Park, and I walk a couple times a day. I walk my dogs, and so I was actually coming back with my dogs when this happened before I got in the car. And I thought of the studio, and I thought of the LA River, because there's this place between two streets at an intersection where moisture and liquid tends to collect. I think there's some kind of leak. I don't know if it's sewage or some kind of leak from the city that happens, and this gnarly water collects in this spot. And I often, step over it, and I try to make sure that my dogs step over it because I don't know if it's dangerous. Is it toxic? Is it a health risk? And for the first moment today, I was able to connect that gutter with the Los Angeles River and think about how all these gutters all across the city are little mini LA rivers or little tributaries, points of contact into the river. And the reason I brought it up to James and Diego is because I had this thought, I walk past this, I walk over this twice a day at least, sometimes more. And for the first time today, thanks to Metabolic Studio and thanks to Lauren and working with everyone here, because of the paradigm shifting visionary work of the studio, for the first time today, I thought, what can I do about this little corner? Like, is there something equivalent to a seed mix that's actually a gutter mix? Like, is there something I can toss into that puddle to try and give it a little chance, a better chance before it gets to the LA River? Like, is there something I can do to help that liquid on its journey? Because we all know where it's going. There's no mystery. That gutter is emptying into the LA River, and then it's going into the ocean. And so I took pictures of it, and I spoke to Diego and James about it. I'd love to begin a little experiment where we, see what it is that's even in that water. By the way, it's between two schools. So there's children that are, around this material every day. Find out what it is, see if there's anything that I could possibly do, because it's not that much liquid, it's just these puddles. And so is there a little, puddle intervention that could happen in these temporary yet strategic interventions with the landscape? And so it's something I've been thinking throughout the day. And I just really hadn't made that physical connection between every gutter in Los Angeles and the LA River until today.
I'm up to helping you, Emily. In the
Awesome.
past, we had the ability to go down to the LA River, and Lauren really posed a question on how we can filter the stormwater coming off the streets. And she challenged us, right? And so Farm Lab came up with the idea of using recycled socks, which Michelle came up with, and we stuffed them with mycelium and seed. And sure enough, we went back, maybe I think it was like a month, 2 months later, sure enough, we started seeing life. So it is possible again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll help
awesome.
you.
Yeah. I want to have an intervention with my sidewalk.
Sock waddles. Like Lauren said, waddle plus fungi equals filter. This idea of the waddle is really fun to me. First of all, the word waddle. Second of all, but second of all, it waddles around and it helps helps filter. Anyway, sock waddles. I'm in on that. I will go out with you guys and do gorilla sock waddling on the whole watershed of the LA River.
Yes, I have to sing out in praise of thistles as well, because we have had some amazing thistle extravaganzas on the coming out of the floodplain that we pulled out of the LA River in October. And these thistles are thistles that haven't been seen for more than 100 years in Southern California. So the seeds of these incredibly colorful and incredibly painful to rub up against plants make me think about the buffalo again, because, they're pollinators. Like, they're moving across that vast landscape, actually was responsible for seeding the prairies. So, when we talk about the regeneration of prairies, I really can't imagine how you would do it without reintroducing the buffalo. And it really made me kind of think about that again when I started seeing, when I was in Chicago, pictures of thistles coming out of the floodplain. I somehow thought about the beauty and the heft of these massive pollinators that created the potentiality for the interdependent weave of plant, soil, and primary mammal, living systems.
I love the word heft that you used, because I feel like that is part of the force of the bison herd and moving, and imagining that is. I'm thankful for this being part of this series, because it's made me think about the center of our continent in ways I I hadn't before. I might have known about the bison. I didn't know about the force of the bison, the force that they were, and yeah, I really, really liked looking back in time too, because it kind of grounded all of these readings that we've been doing and these current moments in this it gave a deep root to that understanding that I think is important to navigate into the future with, you know. Um, so, so I was, yeah.
Maybe it's time to segue. Um, Before we sing tonight, could everybody take a look at their audio settings? Because the computer will change them on you when you're not looking. So if you go to the little arrow next to the microphone icon and go to audio settings, and then check that your input level is about in the middle. Output is just what you will hear back from your computer. So that around in the middle is probably good too. And then tonight, I want to read this short and evocative piece that Lauren Bond wrote. And we'll go straight from listening to it into the singing part. So people who haven't done it before, just feel free to join the herd. Oh my God, I have to plug in my computer. Pause, pause, pause. Be prepared. Sorry, I didn't catch that sooner. So yeah, after this little reading, I will start something and Emily usually, hopefully, will jump in and then just feel free, wisdom of the herd, what your voice wants to add to this, and it can be a melody, it can be one note that will move beautifully with the other voices. So here is the biogeosonification of the Great Prairies by the ranging bison on the North American continent. Imagine, if you can, the pounding of bison, each one a ton, a herd of them, maybe in the hundreds, stampeding. Try and imagine the intensity of that sound and its agency. It has been said that a bison stampede sounds like thunder from the perspective of our ears in the open air. Now, imagine that you are a creature that lives underground, a microorganism. Imagine that sound with the soil as both a lid and a skin that makes the sound and holds it within. It must have been an astounding and regular force. Now, since we know that sound travels on water farther than in air, a stampeding bison sonic wave must have been an almost continental experience. And since the range of the North American bison stretched east-west from the Mississippi watershed to the Rocky Mountains, an area that had the deep, long-rooted, tall grasses of the prairies, then those grasses' root systems would have been enlivened by the agency that sound had to activate the water table. Imagine the dancing, spinning, whirling pollen, seeds, spores, yeast, bacteria, underground, moved by the striking of the multitude of bison hooves and their heft.